Sold for not bearing children. That was the whisper. That was the price. $2. One for the sack, one for the silence. They said she was cursed, said a sack was mercy, said her last husband put it on her right before he vanished into the river. She stood barefoot in the dirt, hands tied in front, head lowered like an animal too tired to resist. The burlap bag covered everything above her collarbone, drawn tight with twine like sealing off rot. The auctioneer didn't smile. He just cleared his throat, read from a stained slip of paper, and said the town was within its rights to move her along. A few men laughed. A few spit. Most turned away. Then a cough like the rattle of pine bark. A man in the back raised 2 fingers. No one had noticed him till then, just a dark figure leaning on a whittled cane with a beard like a thundercloud. $1's too kind, someone muttered. But 2. He must be lonely or worse. The hammer dropped. The girl didn't flinch. He stepped forward, didn't touch her, just untied her hands. She didn't look up. He didn't ask her name. But as they walked away, boots dragging through dirt, someone tossed a stone and shouted, "She'll curse your land, Lumberjack." He didn't stop, didn't even glance back, but he did something no one expected. He reached over, took her hand, and held it. And for the briefest moment, that hand tightened around his. They passed the town gates as whispers rose behind them. That sack ain't just cloth. It's a warning. No woman should sell for less than a mule. He'll hang by sunrise. But the man just walked like he'd been waiting years to leave that place, like the girl was the only honest thing left in it. No one knew his name. Not really. Only that he came down once a month with timber and scars, that he never smiled and once knocked a sheriff flat for saying Indian blood runs cheap. He was myth in flannel, but even myths don't buy women. Yet he had. For $2. At the edge of the woods, she hesitated. He turned, and without a word he took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders, sack and all. She nodded once, then followed him into the pines. Some say love begins with sight, others with names. But theirs began with something else entirely, a silence that refused to judge, a sack that hid pain, and a man who didn't need to see to believe she mattered. The path to his cabin wound through forests thick as secrets. Pine needles muted their steps. Crows watched from high branches, silent witnesses to an unspoken pact. She walked half a pace behind him, the coat swallowing her frame. Still barefoot, still silent, still hooded in that ragged sack tied tight beneath her chin. He didn't ask her to speak, didn't ask her to remove it. He simply walked like a man used to carrying things he didn't understand. When they reached the cabin, wood dark with aged chimney still warm from last week's fire, he opened the door, stepped aside and waited. She paused, looked past him into the dark. 1 step, then 2. The sack turned toward the hearth. She sat on the floor, back straight, hands folded, like she didn't believe the chair was meant for her. He went about quietly, lit the fire, boiled water, chopped kindling without a word. Outside snow threatened, inside silence thickened. At one point he placed a bowl of beans and cornbread beside her. She didn't move. Then slowly one trembling hand reached out. She didn't eat like she was hungry. She ate like she hadn't been allowed to. He watched her for a moment, then turned away. That night he laid a bedroll near the hearth, placed a second one by the far wall. He pointed then to himself. She understood. She didn't sleep. He didn't snore. Somewhere before dawn she whispered something through the sack. He didn't catch it, didn't press her. But he lit the fire again, just a little higher. Days passed. Routine bloomed. He chopped. She swept. He cooked. She gathered water. Never once did he reach for the sack. Even when snow clung to it like lace, even when ash from the fire made her cough, he waited, offering space, not questions. Once, while drying her wet clothes by the fire, he found a scrap of fabric stitched into her hem. Not a name, not a mark, just a bird painted in faded blue. He didn't mention it, just set it gently by her folded shirt. That night she left the bird facing outward, toward him. One evening he brought back something from town, a new pair of boots, small, unworn, wrapped in brown paper. He placed them by the door, didn't say a word. She didn't wear them that night. But in the morning he found the boots lined up beside his mud caked on their soles. He smiled barely, then lit the fire. Outside, the world forgot them. Inside, something slow took root like moss growing over stone. He began humming while carving. She began folding his shirts. One afternoon, she set 2 mugs on the table, one for him, one for her. He noticed, didn't comment. But the next day, he made tea and filled both. Some nights she would sit with her back to the wall watching embers dance in the hearthlight. He would glance at her, then down at the floor where his hands whittled shapes without form. No names, no pasts, just wood and warmth and a space where a woman could wear a sack and still be seen. And in that silence a strange kind of hope began to breathe. The snow deepened. Wolves howled farther each night. But in the cabin there was stillness, not fear. She'd stopped flinching at the door's creak, stopped huddling in corners. Her hands, once curled in defense, now moved with quiet purpose, folding linens, stirring pots, setting the table for 2. The sack still stayed, but looser now, like a veil, not a prison. He never stared, never pried, but once she caught him glancing when the wind shifted and the sack's edge fluttered, revealing the faint curve of a jawline scarred and silent. He turned away quickly, as if ashamed to have looked. That night she left his tea a little sweeter, a small thing. But in the hush of their life it rang like thunder. One morning she found a carved bird on the windowsill, blue like the one on her hem. Its wings outstretched, unfinished. No note, no explanation. But it stayed there, and so did she. That week she sang, not loud, not even a full tune, just a few notes while sweeping. He paused mid-chop axe, resting on his shoulder. Didn't say a word, but the next day he brought back a bell. Hung it by the window. When wind brushed it, it sang for her. In time, they spoke in gestures. He'd point to the kettle, she'd nod. She'd hold up herbs, he'd smile or shake his head. When her ankle twisted hauling water, he lifted her like dry wood, set her by the fire, and wrapped her foot in warm cloth. She tried to murmur something, an apology maybe, but he raised a finger, then gently placed a spoon in her palm. A silent offering. You still matter. One night during a cold snap, the roof cracked from the weight of snow. He climbed to clear it. She followed, bucket in hand. They worked side by side, breath fogging in the dark, snowflakes kissing burlap and beard alike. Suddenly she slipped. A cry tore through the night. She tumbled, arms flailing, but he caught her. Arms locked around her waist. For a second her sack pressed against his shoulder, and she froze, heart pounding like a trapped thing. He eased her down, held her elbow, didn't speak, but didn't let go until she nodded. That night she added an extra log to the fire, watched him as he carved, and for the first time she lifted the sack halfway, just enough to sip tea without spilling. He looked only once, then returned to carving. Not invading, just seeing her as she chose to be seen. Each small act was a thread in something larger. A quilt made of kindness, not pity. She began humming more, started folding laundry with lavender, laughed once when he dropped a skillet. He pretended not to notice, but the corners of his mouth curled. One morning she reached across the table and poured him tea. No words, just the sound of warm liquid filling an old mug. When he looked up, she met his gaze through the cloth, through the silence, through everything, and held it. That day he carved a second bird. Wings folded, tail curled. He didn't set it on the sill. He placed it on her pillow. Later that night it rested in her hands as she slept, still masked, but finally at peace. Winter relented. Just a little. Enough for the snow to soften, for birds to return in hesitant twos. The days grew longer. So did her presence in the light. She began leaving the sack untied. Not off, not yet, but undone so her breath could rise freely from beneath it. Of course he noticed, but said nothing. Until the night she broke. It was during supper. He'd made stew. She'd baked cornbread, burned at the edges but edible. They sat at the table, hands inches apart. The fire cracked. The cabin glowed amber. She set her spoon down, took a long breath, then whispered Clara. The name hung in the room like smoke, fragile, heavy, unreal. He didn't move, didn't blink. She continued haltingly, voice shaking like the words scraped their way out of her. I was married. Once. Pause. I couldn't. She trailed off, touched the sack at her throat. His family said I was barren, said I cursed the crops, said I must be part Apache, too dark, too quiet. They blamed me for everything. Her hands trembled. Then the baby died, and he tied this sack on me, called me ghost wife. Tears soaked through the cloth. Her voice broke. I wore it for weeks. He said if I took it off, he'd bury me. No one stopped him. No one spoke. A pause, then a whisper so low he leaned forward to hear. I didn't take it off, even when he disappeared, even when they sold me, because part of me thought, maybe they were right. Silence followed, the kind that swallows whole. She shook as she wept. The sack sagged slightly. One cheekbone bruised long ago peeked out. He stood, moved slowly, knelt beside her. Then with a hand rough as bark and slow as snowfall, he placed a carving knife in her hand, pointed to the floor. She looked down, confused. He took her hand in his, guided it, and together they carved CLARA into the plank between their chairs. Each letter deep, certain, permanent. When they finished, she looked at the name, her name, like it was something sacred, and he said quiet but firm, now it's home. That night she didn't tie the sack at all. Let it hang open at the neck like a curtain drawn back. And for the first time he saw her eyes red-rimmed but defiant. She watched the fire. He watched her. And somewhere outside a bluebird sang in the dark. From then on she carved beside him. Small shapes, birds mostly. One that looked like it was flying even when still. He taught her without teaching. Let her hands learn from his. Some nights she'd trace her name on the floor with her toe. Not to check if it was still there, but to remind herself that she was. But peace doesn't last long when pain has a memory. One dusk, while chopping wood near the tree line, he found footprints. Fresh. Too large for her. Too heavy for deer. He didn't tell her. But that night he cleaned his rifle, checked the locks. She noticed, didn't ask. But the sack, she folded it and tucked it deep in a drawer. Not gone, but no longer needed. For the first time in years she slept with her hair uncovered, and in the morning when she carved her initials beside her name. Her hands didn't shake. Spring didn't come with flowers, just softer winds and less reason to wear boots indoors. Clara moved freely now, hair braided, face bared to the sun when she fetched water. But always with caution, always listening. He noticed, never said so. But she caught him watching the tree line more often. His whittling paused, mid-shave eyes narrowed. Still they built a routine thick as the walls that sheltered them. She cooked. He repaired the porch steps. They laughed twice. And once when she placed a hand on his shoulder as he leaned over a stump, he didn't flinch, didn't move, just breathed. One night a storm rolled in. Rain hammered the roof. Lightning slit the sky open. She sat by the fire, knees drawn close. He carved in silence, a third bird wings folded over a nest. She watched him, then whispered, "Why did you buy me?" He didn't look up, didn't pause the carving. But after a long moment he said, "I didn't." She frowned. He added, "I paid the town to stop pretending it owned you." Then set down the knife, turned toward her. Your name was enough. The fire popped. She stood, walked to the plank with her name and pressed her palm against it. Then turned, took slow steps toward him. She reached for his face, touched the gray in his beard, the line between his brows so furrowed, so tired. His hand rose, met hers halfway. Fingers threaded, rough to rough. No softness, only truth. He whispered, "You don't have to stay." She answered just as soft, "I know." Outside thunder cracked. Inside something opened. Not a kiss, not a promise, but something fuller. A choice. Shared silence that no longer hurt. From that night on she sat beside him, not across. He carved. She sanded. Together they built birds, little things with nowhere to fly. Until the shot. A single blast, sharp and close, just past the woodshed. She froze, mid-step, eyes wide, hand gripping the door frame. He was already moving, rifle in hand, eyes steel. She followed barefoot, breath tight. At the tree line, 3 men stood, guns slung low. One grinned too wide. "Well, look at that. Ghostwife walks now." Another spat. "Town says she's yours, woodsman, but we remember the sack." The third raised his gun. Time she wore it again. He stepped in front of her. No words, no warnings, then chaos, gunfire, splinters, shouts. He fired first, hit one in the leg, another ran, but the third he struck. Barrel cracked against his temple. He fell, blood blooming at his brow. She screamed the first sound she'd made that cracked the sky. And then in a fury even she didn't know she had, she grabbed the fallen rifle, pointed it, hands shaking, eyes unblinking. "Leave!" The last man backed away, hands up. "Fine. Keep your cursed squaw," then disappeared into the trees. She dropped the gun, ran to him. He blinked. Alive. Barely. Blood on her hands, on her hair. She cradled his head and whispered, "I was sold for silence, but I choose to stay for love." At dawn she carried water, cleaned his wounds, held his hand, and when he stirred, eyes cloudy but warm, she said her name again. Louder, with pride, and he, despite cracked ribs and split lips, smiled, then whispered the words that would follow her forever. "You're not the girl with the sack. You're the woman who took it off." For 3 days he didn't rise. The wound above his eye darkened his breath, shallow as creek water in drought. Clara sat beside him, changing cloths, whispering prayers she barely remembered. She didn't cry, didn't panic, but her hands, they never stopped moving. Firewood, herbs, boiling water, spoons of broth pressed to his lips. And sometimes, between heartbeats, she would place her forehead to his and say, "Stay, please stay, please." When he finally opened his eyes, her name was the first word he spoke, not weak, not slurred, clear, like a vow. She laughed, a sound raw and real, then kissed his forehead and whispered, "You idiot." He chuckled, then winced, but he lived because she kept him alive. News traveled fast. The men who'd come for her too were jailed. The third fled west. The town changed tune, started calling her brave, worthy, a miracle of mercy. Too late, too shallow. But she didn't care. She didn't need their names. She had her own. And for the first time she walked into town without the sackhead high back straight, a bluebird stitched on her shawl. The sheriff tried to nod in respect. She didn't return it. But when a girl stared too long, Clara knelt down, offered the carved bird from her pocket, and said, "Don't let anyone cover your face. You were born to fly." At the cabin he recovered slowly. Ribs healing, scars forming, but the damage was deeper. He'd flinch when the wind howled, grimace at loud knocks. One night he asked, "Why stay?" She leaned on the doorway. "Because when I had no name, you didn't ask. When I had no face, you didn't stare. And when I was sold, you treated me like I had worth." He looked at her eyes, dark and quiet, then nodded once and whispered, "Then maybe I was saved too." They made a choice. To live, not just survive. They built a small porch, hung bells from the rafters, started carving birds for trade. But one thing remained. The sack. Clara washed it, dried it, folded it, then brought it to the center of the cabin. She lit a fire, waited for him to sit. Then she placed the sack in the hearth, watched it catch, watched it curl, burn, disappear. And as ash rose, she said, "This was never who I was. Only what they feared." Later, she carved one final bird. This one different, wings outstretched, eyes open, beak tilted to the sky. On its back she etched her name, Clara, then placed it beside the first bird he carved for her unfinished, quiet patient. 2 birds, 1 journey. Then came the letter. A judge offering a formal name change, saying she could erase her past. She burned that too. Not because she hated it, but because she didn't need the law to tell her she was someone else now. She was not Mrs. Ghostwife, not the cursed squaw, not the girl with the sack. She was Clara, and she had survived. One evening they stood together on the porch, watching the wind shift the grass. He reached for her hand. She took it. He said, "This land is yours now, too." She smiled. "Then let's plant something." And they did, with dirt and water in the hands of two people who knew how to lose and still choose love. The seasons changed like breath. Spring melted into golden wheat, then frost, then silence. But the cabin remained. Solid, worn, alive. Inside, 2 mugs sat on the shelf, his chipped at the rim. Hers with a painted bluebird. Neither had belonged to anyone else, because they'd built a life with their own hands. Clara's hair grayed at the temples first. She let it, wore it like a crown. He stopped carving birds. His hands had stiffened, but she still lined their windows with the ones they'd made. Each wing a memory, each beak a choice. They didn't speak of the sack anymore, didn't have to. But sometimes Clara would touch the tablecloth stitched from that very same burlap, not as shame, not as grief, but as proof that what once covered her in silence could now carry a loaf of bread, a jug of tea, a vase of wildflowers. Children came to visit, strangers too, drawn by stories told in whispers about a woman who once wore a sack and the man who bought her freedom with silence. They never told the full truth. Some things belonged only to them. But when asked, Clara would smile and say, "We were 2 broken branches who chose to bend toward each other." One spring morning she found him still in his chair, eyes closed, peaceful, hands still curled as if reaching for hers. She didn't cry. She dressed him in his best shirt, placed the first bird he carved beside him, and whispered, "I found my name because you never needed it." Then sat beside him until the sun climbed high. He was buried at the edge of the woods, next to a tree where she hung wind chimes. They sang for him when she couldn't. In time, she carved alone again, smaller pieces, simpler shapes. But one day she finished the unfinished bird, the one with wings paused in flight. She completed them, etched a second name beside hers on the back, Jonas, then placed it between the 2 mugs, not to mourn, but to remember. When the town asked for her story, for a book or monument, she refused. But she gave them one line, just one, carved into a bench outside the general store beneath a painted bird. "I was sold in silence, but I loved out loud." Years later, after she was gone too, a boy wandered through the forest and found a small, weathered cabin. Inside, 2 mugs, a dozen birds, a name carved in the floorboard. And beside the hearth, a faded tablecloth, soft, familiar, like a story you didn't know you were part of until the last page. And maybe that's all love ever is. Not a grand fire, but a steady hand, a space beside the fire, a voice that waits for your name, then says it like a prayer. Some wounds aren't visible, they don't bleed, but they bruise the soul, the kind that silence you, convince you you're too broken to be worth saving. This story reminds us we are not the worst thing ever done to us. Clara was shamed for her pain, silenced by those who feared her strength. But healing didn't come in a roar. It came in tea poured quietly, and names spoken gently, and someone asking nothing but giving everything. Love, real love, doesn't rescue with noise. It shows up, stays, listens when you can't speak, waits when you're not ready. And one day, back your name as if it had never been stolen. For anyone feeling forgotten, buried under someone else's cruelty, this is your reminder: you are still here. You still matter. And sometimes the person who sees your worth is the one who needed saving too. Let your scars breathe. Let them teach you to hold others softer. And if you must wear a sack, let it be only until you've found the fire where you'll burn it yourself. Because even after silence, you can still love out loud.